Welcome to the video lesson today on what leaves do in plants. So we're looking at the importance of those green things that are attached to the branches and twigs and things in all the trees around us at the moment. As you're fully aware, obviously some trees lose their leaves during the winter months when it's a bit cooler, and we'll have a look at that a little bit later on as well. But essentially we're looking at leaves and the importance of leaves in terms of keeping plants alive and in terms of doing some of the functions that they need to do on a daily basis. So last time when you had a full lesson, it was on water transport within plants, and we looked at the fact that water didn't enter the plant through the leaves like some of the other things do that we're going to look at later on today. Water actually enters the plants through the roots. Okay, and the process that it does that through is by osmosis. So in order for that to work, there needs to be less water in the roots than there is in the soil around it, so that the water moves from the soil into the roots. Now, if the water never left the roots, it was never drawn anywhere or never taken anywhere, those roots would be fully saturated and then no more water would ever be able to be taken in. So in plants they have a stream called a transpiration stream, and that's basically almost a column of water that's being dragged up through the plant from the roots all the way up to the leaves, and that water is then evaporating from the leaves, from the underside of the leaves, through something called stomata. Without that process, so the water would just stop where it was. It would never move back, and you'd never get any more. You'd never get any more nutrients entering the plant. So the process of transpiration is very, very important. In fact, it's critical to keeping the plants alive. So two processes you need to remember the names of. And the process of transpiration is water evaporating from the leaf, and then also the process of osmosis, which is the process of the water entering the roots at the bottom. And they rely on each other. Or, if osmosis stopped, there would be no water to transpirate. And if transpiration stopped, then osmosis wouldn't be able to happen down at the roots. Now, all this sort of drawing up of water is very, very important because it's involved in the process of photosynthesis. It's one of the reactants. It's one of the things that goes into the reaction in order to create the glucose at the end of it, which is what the plant's after. Okay, and the opening slide of the last video lesson that we did showed an enormous redwood, and you can actually see the power of transpiration drawing that water up through the leaf. So the vessels that we looked at in terms of transporting the water were called xylem, and these xylem run from roots all the way up to leaves, transporting that water to where it needs to go. The other vessels that we looked at were called phloem, and they were more to be sort of carrying sugars and other nutrients which are important for photosynthesis. So by the end of this lesson, you'll have some idea of what the structure of a leaf is like, and how that leaf structure enables photosynthesis to happen. Okay, so as I said at the last lesson, we looked at a giant redwood, and obviously this is another example here, and you can see the scale of these things. You can see the size of the lady at the bottom, the size of the car, and then obviously the size of the tree as well. So not only is there a powerful process involved of sort of drawing this water up through from root to tip in this redwood, but just think about another thing. If you actually chopped this tree down and set fire to it, how long do you think that would actually burn for? There's obviously going to be an incredible fire, a lot of heat released. And the point I'm getting on this is that energy that's in that tree that's going to be released through burning it has all come about through the production of glucose, through photosynthesis, and then the process of respiration, releasing that energy, allowing that tree to become that size. And all that energy is actually stored within that tree, otherwise it would die. So the amount of energy that's been stored in there shows the power of photosynthesis, the amount of energy the amount of glucose that can actually be made through this process if the right conditions, the right circumstances are in place to allow that process to carry on. And obviously, as we've looked at in the past, that involves the right amount of carbon dioxide, sunlight and water. Okay, so a quick refresh. What is photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is the process by which plants make their food, essentially. So it's not the process by which they make energy directly. Okay, so what they need is the carbon dioxide and the water. You can see that going in on the reactant side, and in the middle, the energy that's required to make that reaction take place is coming from sunlight. So it's very, very important there's enough carbon dioxide, enough water and enough sunlight in situ to be able to allow that reaction to take place. And what's actually being released is glucose, actually being created, if you like, those molecules being restructured with that energy to make glucose, and oxygen. Now, oxygen in this case is almost the waste product, if you like, although it's very, very important to us. The important bit for the photosynthesis for the plant is the making of the glucose, although some of that oxygen could potentially be used in respiration a little bit later on to actually release that energy. Now, plants have green leaves generally. Some of them don't, but most of them are green, and that's due to chlorophyll, which is a pigment in all the chloroplasts, which are the important part of in each cell that allows photosynthesis to take place. And remember that chloroplasts aren't in animal cells, and because we don't do photosynthesis. Most of the process of photosynthesis happens during the daylight. There is some stuff that happens at night as well. In terms of the bit that you can see in front of you there, the carbon dioxide plus water, giving you glucose and oxygen, that can only happen during daytime when there's sunlight available. Okay, so the leaf itself, hopefully, if you haven't got any leaves near you at the moment, or you can't see any leaves, you can imagine them in your mind. They have two sides. They have an underside and a top side. And the top side is generally shinier. And that's to do with that layer that's in there to try and sort of prevent them from losing so much water. Underneath they're much rougher, and they're much rougher because the underside of the leaf does a slightly different job. So the importance of the leaf is where photosynthesis happens. It's the green part of the plant. It's where all the chloroplasts are and the chlorophyll in those plant cells, and it's where photosynthesis happens. And you just need to remember that photosynthesis is not the process by which plants make energy. It's the process by which plants make their food, and that's by converting carbon dioxide and water with sunlight into oxygen and glucose. Now, this slide is the crux of the lesson. So, difficult to imagine, but you have to think about this leaf being sideways on. So the top bit here, where it says cuticle, my mouse, this top here, the cuticle bit, is the shiny side of the leaf. It's the top side of the leaf. This leaf is actually, you're almost looking through it as if it was level with your eye. So the top section here is the cuticle, the shiny bit. Now these top cells here, these palisade cells, are the cells that contain the majority of the chloroplasts. You can see them here, these green discs. Now the reason for that is hopefully quite self-explanatory. So that if you imagine the sunlight coming into the leaf, it's going to hit the top of this leaf here, and these cells here are the ones that are going to be able to absorb most of that sunlight. So these cells are the ones that are going to be doing the photosynthesis. So in terms of our water and our carbon dioxide being delivered, it's important that it gets to these cells here, these green discs, and allows the photosynthesis to happen. And these cells here, these palisade cells, are very tightly packed in order to try and get as many chloroplasts together as they can to be able to produce as much glucose as possible in the right environment, the right circumstances. Underneath that, you have this spongier layer. Sorry, I've lost my mouse at the moment. This spongier layer, and this spongier layer has many more gaps. And if you think about the things that photosynthesis needs, it needs carbon dioxide and it needs water. If these cells are too tightly packed together, it's going to take a long time for the carbon dioxide, etc., to be able to diffuse across from cell to cell to cell. So instead of that, there's these gaps underneath. So these gaps allow these products to move around. It allows the oxygen to come out following photosynthesis, and it allows the carbon dioxide to get in to all these cells up at the top of the leaf here. Now, nothing would be able to get in now in terms of gases to the plant if it wasn't for these stomata at the bottom. So you can see these guard cells here. When these guard cells are open, little holes appear in the leaf underneath. And that allows oxygen to come out, and it allows carbon dioxide to come in. And that carbon dioxide travels from the underside of the leaf through this spongy area, so through the gaps between these cells here, and up to these palisade cells where the photosynthesis can take place. So sunlight in, carbon dioxide up through the stomata, and then remember that the water is coming up through the roots. So those three different reactants, so those three different important parts of photosynthesis come from different places. And again, sunlight from above, carbon dioxide in from underneath through the gaps in the bottom of the leaf, and then the water's coming in from the roots. When those three things combine in the presence of the chlorophyll in the chloroplasts here, the photosynthesis happens, your glucose is made, the glucose is produced, your oxygen comes out of the cells and leaves via these stomata, and that increases the amount of oxygen in the air and allows us to obviously carry on doing our own respiration, which is our way of releasing energy. So Leaves are adapted, and you'll notice that leaves all generally look quite similar. Okay, they all generally have a large surface area. They're all generally quite thin, so their depth, if you like, is not big at all, and they generally are green, so they contain lots and lots of chloroplasts. So have a little think about why that might be. So pause the video for a moment and just have a think about why it might be that leaves are big, thin, and contain lots of chloroplasts. Okay, so the reason they have large surface areas is that they're able to absorb a lot more sunlight. So, you know, if they were small, their surface area would be much smaller, they'd be much less exposed, they'd have a lot less cells exposed to the sunlight, and therefore they'd be able to do much less photosynthesis, produce much less glucose. They're thin because you want a small distance. You want a small distance for that carbon dioxide that's coming in at the bottom of the leaf to be able to get to the important cells. If they were really, really deep and thick and chunky, that process would slow down, and carbon dioxide would get to those cells much less easily, and that process would be much, much slower. And then finally, chloroplasts. Hopefully you got this one. And the more chloroplasts there are, the more capacity there is to do photosynthesis, the more ability there is to make that glucose. Okay, so it's important to remember that plants aren't around for us. Okay, so plants came a long time before animals, and certainly much, billions of years before human beings. So why are they doing this this process of making the glucose? And it's quite self-explanatory in terms of the equation at the bottom. So that equation at the bottom there is respiration. So that glucose, in the presence of oxygen, reacts. It almost burns. Okay, so when things are exposed to oxygen, sometimes they burn, and that's essentially what's here. So the energy is being released from this glucose in the presence of oxygen, and that's creating carbon dioxide, water, and energy. And that energy is the important stuff that's going to keep the plant growing. It's going to allow it to replace the cells that are no longer useful, and obviously be able to carry on doing the chemical processes that are involved in keeping that plant alive. So they aren't doing it for us. It's great that they are doing photosynthesis because that's releasing the oxygen that we need, and without plants, humans wouldn't be able to survive. But essentially, they're actually making that glucose for themselves, and then they're burning that glucose in the presence of oxygen. The process of respiration, the same as we do, to release energy to be able to carry on doing the things that they need to do. If these plants are therefore using their own glucose, what's the point in us eating them? Because obviously, if you think about the plants using glucose, they're going to be releasing their energy from it and keeping themselves alive. But what's the point in us eating them? And the answer is that they make a lot more glucose than they need, and that glucose has to be stored. So when we store glucose, when we've had a big dinner and we need to pack our glucose away, ready for the future, for releasing energy further down the line, we store it as something called glycogen. In plants, they call it something called starch, and you might have heard of starch in things like rice and pasta and potatoes. And essentially, that's what they are. They are stores of long chains of glucose that have been packed away, ready to be used at future times. And obviously, that that starch can then be broken down back into glucose to go through respiration to release that energy. So when we're eating plants, we're essentially eating that starch. We're actually eating their stores, if you like, of glucose. And then that's allowing us to then do the respiration instead of the plant. So what I've put together is hopefully quite brief this week, because I appreciate you've got a shorter amount of time to do it. I would like you to try and answer the questions on the Microsoft Forms document that is linked to on Teams. The link is also on this slide, but I appreciate it's not going to be particularly easy for you to get it from there. So it's titled Plant Leaves and Photosynthesis. I only want short answers from each question, because I'm not expecting long essays, but I do want you to do them in a way that shows me that you understand what this video lesson has been about. Okay, so any questions, pop them on Teams for me please, or send me an email. Otherwise, hopefully you can have a go at the forms document on there, and hopefully we've got a decent understanding now of what leaves do in plants and how they help with photosynthesis. Okay, I'll see you again.